it. But this Aspetuck Native Pairings lecture series started late last year with our partners at Earth Place in Westport. And it was a goal to have local speakers or native speakers who have expertise in a specific area that can help us to do the three things that we're asking people to do in the green corridor. Let me see if I can. My slide's not going. Oh, there we go. So I am the landowner engagement director of the Aspetuck Green Corridor. And the Aspetuck Land Trust, for those of you who don't know, is a land protection and land stewardship nonprofit. We have close to 2,000 acres protected in the towns of Fairfield, Weston, Easton, and Westport, and 44 nature preserves, which have thankfully been open through this whole COVID experience we've been having. And the concept of the Green Corridor is based on science, in that we've had an ecologist look at some of the areas in this 4-town framework that can allow us to protect the landscape and create corridors to move wildlife across the land in a seamless way. So our goal is to connect our protected open spaces, our water company lands, our land trust preserves, with our privately owned land, which is our backyard. And we're trying to convince people to change what they do in their backyards, because their backyards are actually stepping stones on this corridor, to allow for the free flow of wildlife across the area. And when we change how we treat our backyards, we improve the biodiversity, not only of our yards, but of our region. We're asking people to do 3 things specifically. 1 is plant native plants. 2, rethink your lawn, whether that means reducing the size of it or planting clover. And number 3, avoid pesticide and herbicide use. We don't want to begin planting natives, attracting wildlife and pollinators to our properties, and then spraying them with pesticides. That's an ecological trap. So these are the 3 things we're asking people to do to heal the landscape. And today our focus is going to be on the first one, which is planting native plants. And we'll get to that in a moment. And I just thought it would be important for people to understand the difference and in the coordinating efforts of the Green Corridor and the pollinator pathways. So what this map shows is that the Green Corridor, which is the black cross-hatched map, which I just showed you, which is based on areas of high conservation value, our watershed areas, overlap beautifully with the pollinator pathway towns. And the towns that are on the pollinator pathway, we have 95 in the state right now, and across into other states in the Northeast. In the areas of Fairfield, Westport, Weston, and Easton, those towns have decided that the entire town is on the pollinator pathway, encouraging people to do those same 3 things: plant natives, no pesticides, and rethink your lawn. And so what we have now is an overlap, or what I like to consider a double dose of biodiversity efforts. So we're very fortunate to live in this region. I live in Trumbull, where we have none of that cool stuff, but I find myself to be a very strong pollinator pathway partner and a Green Corridor partner. And so we're encouraging people to go to our aspetucklandtrust.org website. And first step you can do is sign our pledge, what homeowners can do. And we're going to ask you to do these 3 things on your property. Again, plant natives, rethink your lawn, avoid pesticides. Take the pledge, and we'll send you this Green Corridor Partner mailbox sign, which is shown here in this photo. And it's a perfect fit. If you're already on the pollinator pathway and you have that sign, then you put this one next to it, and that means your property is super biodiverse. What I'll mention later on, is that we have open right now our very first Aspetuck Land Trust native plant sale. And we're offering these EcoType native plants that are wild collected seed and grown locally. That's what our talk's going to be about today. So again, we encourage you to go on our website and place some orders so that you can take an action step by introducing these into your backyard. So I'd like to begin by introducing our two speakers today. I'm very honored to have both of these fabulous women sharing their expertise with us. Dina Brewster is the Executive Director of the Northeast Organic Farming Association, also called Connecticut NOFA. She is the founder of the 45-acre Hickories Organic Farm in Ridgefield. And Dina believes that we have a responsibility to strengthen our regional agrarian economy, improve the long-range ecological stewardship of our land and water, and enliven our cultural commitment to farming. And we also today have Sephra Alexandra. She holds a teaching master's in agroecological education from Cornell and is trained in the tradition of seed saving by the Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance. Sephra is a wilderness skills instructor and permaculture educator, and she believes that the solutions must move beyond sustainability and promote regenerative succession, fostering through hands-on, place-based engagement. So I'd like to welcome our speakers today. I will stop sharing my screen and then pass the torch over to Dina so she can begin her lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel, and thank you to the Aspetuck Land Trust for putting this together. I've really been so lucky since engaging with Aspetuck and meeting Jean and the work that's happening in Easton. And I have found such kinship with this group, so I'm just so grateful to be a part of it. I also wanted to just thank you guys for having a farmer come and speak about this Green Corridor initiative and the Pollinator Pathway Initiative. Because often what I have found in my career is that farmers and conservation folks are often not at the same table, or at least not often enough at the same table. And so I'm really pleased to be able to try to bring together the world of conservation agriculture in our part of the state. And today I'm mostly going to talk about my own journey to the creation with Sephra of the EcoType project, which is the focus of our conversation today. My own journey towards this, and it's been a really exciting couple of years, and certainly very educative for me. I've been involved with the pollinator pathway for years. In fact, I've been a beekeeper since I was probably 5 or 6 years old. I remember my mom having to stitch together my first bee suit because they didn't make them for little kids. So I've been sort of intimately aware my whole life, not only as a beekeeper, but now in the last 15 years as a farmer, on how central the pollinators are to my livelihood now that I'm a farmer. And so the perspective I bring is one that really is rooted in the food system and wanting to protect and secure the food system for my own, farm and for future generations. So a beekeeper, since I was 5, a farmer for the last 15 years. And then about 5 years ago was really when I sort of started to dive deep into the native plant community. And I started a trout pond as part of my as part of the food system on my farm. I wanted to be able to provide inland protein, and I have this beautiful pond, which you will see later on our farm tour. And I decided I wanted to stock it with rainbow trout. And so I went out and, as any good farmer, found my supplier and dumped a whole bunch of trout in the pond. And with the trout came all of this corn and soy-based fish food. And I said, well, that's not what trout eat. And I started on an education of, well, if you are going to put trout in a pond, you are going to need to have enough insects, because trout are insect eaters, to feed those trout. And we just don't have enough insects anymore to do that. And so in trying to solve that problem, just to feed my trout and sell more fish, I ended up learning about the importance of native plants. And that took me to wanting to increase the insect population, took me to the Native Plant Working Group, which is Dr. Stoner at the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station. And there I met Sephra. Again, I saw Mel and the Pollinator Pathway folks. But as I said, my interest is really rooted in food production. And I recognize, as Doug Ptolemy and all those folks say, that without these insects, without this population and abundance of insects constantly in service working on my farm, our food system is compromised. What was true in the trout pond is quadruply true in the blueberry fields and in my tomato greenhouses. That is really an imperative right now as we look at the kinds of conservation, the ways in which the ecological crisis is impacting Connecticut. So I went to the Native Plant Working Group and I met this wonderful group of scientists and researchers and conservationists, and I approached them as a farmer. And there I learned about the importance of local ecotypes. And what that means is, and Sephra will explain this a lot later, but I didn't just need to plant any old native plant around that pond in order to bring in the insects, to feed the trout, to feed the people. I needed to plant the local ecotypes, meaning the true Connecticut varieties, because that pond is really a large scale habitat restoration. And so Dr. Stoner and Sephra and all these folks said, well, if you don't know what an ecotype is, this is what it is. And Sephra will describe that later. And I said, great, I want to go get some. Let me point me where to go. And they said, well, nobody's making them yet. And so that's where my work really began. And it's where we're going to take off today as we talk about the EcoType project that is now one of the really exciting projects of Connecticut NOFA. What we have found is that the conservation community is desperately trying to save pollinators, and now the ag community and most of the work of the EcoType project in its initial years is being championed by the USDA. The agricultural community knows we need pollinators. And so we have this wonderful intersection where the EcoType project can exist. And it has emerged over the years. The EcoType project is really a table at which myriad stakeholders can sit: conservation folks, landscapers, backyard enthusiasts, land trusts, farmers, nursery growers. And Sephra will talk to you more about that for the next couple of minutes. I will be back later on in this talk to take you on a quick tour of what the current state is of the native plant and seed production at our farm. But I just wanted to give some sort of background about the imperative of this. As an organic grower, for me, this effort about securing wildlife and securing insects that Aspetuck has taken on is one that is of utter urgency. And ultimately, we need you, the backyard, the land, the residential community, to help support the food system by bringing these native plants back into the Connecticut landscape, by setting the table for insects again in Connecticut in an important way. So I'll turn it over to Sephra now, and I will see you back later for a video farm tour of my place. Thank you.
Thanks, Dina. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm so excited to be working with Dean and Mel. My name, again, is Sephra Alexandra. I call myself the seed huntress because for the past 10 years, I've been working in global seed conservation. I'm a fellow for the Crop Trust, which oversees our world seed banking system. And I spent the past, about 2 years ago, in the South Pacific, telling an impact story about why preserving biodiversity through seed is imperative for food security and resilience. I have recently come back to Connecticut, and it's like the story The Alchemist, where you can travel all over the world and you find out that all the work you want to do is right here at home where you started. So linking up with Dina and CT NOFA, when they were beginning to champion this EcoType project, what we realized is that the necessity to preserve our local genetics is imperative for creating these ecological green corridors for our pollinators, for wildlife, and for everything that needs to proliferate and be happy in our ecosystems. So I will share my slides now and give you a little bit more context about what we're talking about. Let's see.
So as Sephra is getting started here, setting up her slides, I just want to let people know that there are questions coming into the Q&A, and please do feel free to visit the bottom of your Zoom screen and pop in some questions for us. We'll be answering questions at the end. And I want to thank the people who've already posted some questions. Looking forward to talking with you a little later on.
Jean, I don't know if someone else is still sharing their screen and needs to stop sharing.
You know, Sephra, looks like you're good to go. As with everything, we enjoy technology here. So at the bottom of your screen, Sephra, that little green arrow, if you can see, if you can activate your screen.
Yep. There,
right.
There
we go.
Ta-da. Thank you very much. That's why we have Jean, our expert Zoomist. Okay, so today's talk is Native Pairings from Earth to Sky, a Pollinator's perspective. And so what you're looking at right now, and what I'll explain, is one of our original founder plots. This is actually at Dina's farm, the Hickories. It's an organic farm in Ridgefield, Connecticut. And these gorgeous beds are actually beds of EcoType pollinator plants. So just to start out, you can see that this restoration and conservation work can be exquisitely beautiful on the landscape. So this is what I'll be walking you through today. This is the pipeline that we're working with to make this new emerging industry available to you, the homeowners, to the land trusts, and ultimately we want to make these EcoType seeds available on a larger scale to municipalities, departments of transportation, to really be having large swaths of land be planted in EcoTypes. And so what is an EcoType? Well, first, I think we need to get a frame of reference. So as we're talking about the pollinator's perspective, when an insect is flying over the land, it doesn't say, oh, hey, now I'm in Connecticut, now I'm in Massachusetts. Those are man-made delineated boundaries. What it does see, and what is illustrated in this map here, which is a map of ecoregions.
Organizational development.
Oh, I think someone needs to go on mute.
All set, thank you.
So what we're looking at here is a map of what are called ecoregions. Perhaps some of you have heard the concept of bioregions. When we look at our country, at our land masses from kind of that eagle eye perspective, and we look at the habitat and ecological mosaics of where we have similar types of ecosystem, whether it's boreal forests or broadleaf temperate forests or marshland, dry arid lands, you can think on a large scale of bioregions. And as we zoom in to more ecosystem specificity, we come to ecoregions. So, and this does take a bit of a painterly broad stroke, but for our purposes here, we are in ecoregion 59. And so what this is saying is, from the perspective of pollinators and the wildlife corridors that we talk about with the green corridor and the pollinator pathway, the genetics of the plants that are growing within ecoregion 59, if you collect them from one place, we can replant them along that corridor And that will be the species that are most well adapted to that area. Oftentimes, I'm a permaculture educator, as Jean introduced, and a large tenet of that is when we look to do this type of work, we want to mimic natural ecosystems. And the best way to mimic those natural ecosystems is by planting what already is existing there. So the big drive home slogan of this project is we want the right plants in the right place. And so what we've done through Ecoregion 59 is work with botanists, which we'll talk about a bit later, to collect this wild seed. Now, first, I just want to preface this by, I think a lot of people on this call might already know and understand the importance of natives. And as Dina said, we don't want perfect to be the enemy of good here. So anyone who's already planting natives, excellent work. What we're just trying to do now is kind of when you go from like the junior varsity to the varsity team, now we're just elevating the conversation and saying, all right, natives, but let's talk about native to where. So a nativar, which is oftentimes when we go to nurseries, when we're buying native plants, they're usually what we call nativars, which are cultivars. So if you think about it, in the nursery trade, you want what's biggest, what blooms best, what looks the prettiest. And to make sure that you're ensuring those genetics, you oftentimes are taking cuttings, and that's how you're doing what's called vegetative propagation. Now, the only downside to that is, like we've all heard the conversations around monocultures in the agrarian landscape, the same thing is true with the native plant landscape. If we're just using the same genetics over and over again for our native plants, what we are losing is that wild diversity that's out in the landscape. So an ecotype, as I mentioned before, is when we are collecting the seed. So when we're in Easton and when we're in Fairfield and when we're in Westport, the insects, just like we cultivate heirlooms in our own gardens, the insects there have been doing the same thing. They've been stewarding those native wild plants. So the genetics, even though the species might look the same as something, those genetics are specifically adapted to the climate, the soil, the air, everything in your terroir or your natural landscape. So if we're able to save those seeds and proliferate those seeds in our wildlife, in our pollinator habitats, in our green corridors, then for mimicking natural ecosystem, that's what's going to do best, be best adapted to our local pests, be what our pollinator friends are looking for, and do everything that that we want to do. So as Dina said, when you go to look for ecotypes, even though there are some great local nurseries that may have a few here and there, it's actually quite difficult to source them. So our impetus was to help address that issue. Now, where do you start? Because I saw this wonderful woman speak at a conference, and when we talk about feeding our pollinators or proliferating these green corridors, you have again at mimicking natural ecosystems. Now, in nature, there are things that bloom and have food summer, fall, winter, spring. And because animals, it's like when you invite guests to your house for a week, and this woman from the South, she hilariously said, you can't invite the guests to your house and only feed them on Monday, y'all. So when we're talking about feeding the pollinators and feeding the wildlife in our landscape, we can't just have plants that bloom in fall and summer. We need to make sure we're looking at year-round bloom times. And also, if we look at forests, they have different trophic layers. They have ground covers and shrubs and vines, and different animals and insects require habitats at different levels. So ultimately, where our long-range goal for this is to have plants and shrubs and trees available that facilitate all of these different ecosystem habitats, whether it's wetland or dry land, all the different trophic layers, and all the different bloom times. But as with any project, we have to start somewhere. So how do we begin? Well, let's see. Okay, there we go. So again, back to this, oh, too fast. So again, back to this infographic. we've been bringing in a bunch of strategic partners to start doing the wild collection of the seed. Right now, we've been predominantly working with Jordy Elkins of Highstead, and he is a wonderful botanist who is able to identify where these wild stands of EcoType pollinator plants are. It takes quite a knowing eye to know lands that haven't been disturbed, lands that are large enough, because with our collections, we want to do it in a regenerative manner. So there's a whole litany of protocols that say you can't collect more than 20%. You need to make sure that, you know, your stands are big enough that they haven't been disturbed. Obviously, there's a bunch of legalities on, you know, the type of property that you can even collect from, whether, you know, private or public and so forth. So he's been wonderful at doing these initial collections of the first species that we have on offer. So we collect the wild seed, and then what happens? Well, we started what are called founder plots. Let's see. Oh. Okay, so if you remember, the first slide in my presentation were the founder plots when they were in full flower at the hickories. And so what a founder plot is when we take that seed, and wild seed has its own journey of how you stratify it, which means you have to, again, mimic natural ecosystems. So we have to put it through a cold period, because if you think about wild seed in the landscape, it falls to the soil, and then throughout the winter goes freeze thaw, muddy freeze thaw. And so when we want to mimic that, we usually put it in damp sand, and you put it in your fridge for a month or so to break its hibernation, so it will germinate. So what you see here is after, this was actually the first year after those flowers had gone to seed. And I have to say, as a seed huntress, I'm always quite encouraged about the ROI of seed. One plant in this first season creates literally thousands and thousands and thousands of seed. So it's very encouraging for this restoration work, because we're able to multiply how much EcoType seed we have very quickly. So what you're seeing here is the first organic EcoType Ecoregion 59 seed. Woo! That's awesome. And I have to say, seed cleaning is kind of like being a Sherlock Holmes MacGyver, and that's maybe for a whole different webinar, but there is definitely a journey within that. So then after we've collected this seed, then again, well, we take that seed and we give it to our nursery partners. And then our nursery partners are able to propagate that seed out and make those EcoType organic local pollinator plants available to you, such as what the Aspetuck Land Trust is doing in their plant sale. So it's really exciting to see how we can weave this ecological web of strategic partners together. And what I'll talk about at the end is this is really, as Dina said, we're bringing everyone to the table. This is an initiative that allows everyone in the conservation, agriculture, science movement to all come together and be working on and championing this imperative initiative. So as you all are here, the great thing about this is when we talk about the green corridor, and when we talk about, as Dina said, this project has initially been funded under a USDA specialty crop block grant, because we realize no pollinators, no produce. So bringing these founder plots on farm allows this biodiversity buffet of these pollinator insects that are really helping to proliferate and safeguard our food security. As we've seen with this past COVID-19 pandemic, having local food resources has never been so important. And the way that we need to safeguard and ensure that is by making sure that we have the pollinators on site and have what they need so that they can help us provide what we need. And so I think it's really important when we think about the concentric rings of this restoration work that we're doing. If you think about the land trusts and the green corridors, us as homeowners, we need to not just be homeowners, but land stewards to fill in that fragmentation and make sure that we have these way stations that these insects and these pollinators and the wildlife in between these public lands and in between these farmers can also be finding their ecotypes and what it is that they need for their habitat, for reproduction, for food, really filling out their ecological cycles. So from home owners to pollinator gardens, land trusts, and then municipalities, we all have a role to play. And hopefully everyone out there, you can find yourself in this honeycomb web. And again, as I said before, the reason why this initiative is so great is it really empowers everyone in the sustainability, agriculture, conservation, restoration movement to see what they can add and how they can participate in proliferating these EcoType restoration sites. And we all get to work together. So I'm really excited to hear all of your questions after Dina gives you a wonderful farm tour of her founder plots. And thanks so much for being interested in all this and for coming in today.
Thanks, Sephra. So a couple of things occurred to me before I sort of walk you through as best I can my farm in the chaos of the middle of May. And one is that I have spent so much of my time as a farmer studying, and particularly as an organic farmer, studying soil health. And I would say the first 10 years of my farming career were really about singularly trying to build soil and recognize, you know, the importance of that and the diversity of life in the soil and how that diversity supports the health of my plants. Again, organic farming, as Sephra said, is really an effort to, in our effort to mimic nature. We are actually needing to do the same thing above ground too, that the diversity of insect life, the diversity of mammals, birds, all of that will ultimately support our crops just as much as the soil. And so while NOFA has a ton of soil initiatives, we also have these above ground conservation initiatives. And I'll start by just sharing out a quick video. It takes about 5 minutes and I may stop it in and out. Hopefully everyone can see this. But I just walked around the farm the other day and decided to take what I thought would be relevant images for our conversation, and recognize that most of these, I'll explain sort of where you're looking at what month of the year. I've cut in a few photos from other times a year. But I started with my blueberry field. There are about 150 blueberry bushes, and blueberries are uniquely suited to a non-honeybee pollinator. They are uniquely suited to buzz pollinators like this beautiful queen bee who is spending her days. And I love this shot because you're able to see some of the young blueberries forming, as well as the flowers she's still working on. And really putting your sort of bug eyes on allows you to see my farm a little differently. I think farmers, we tend to focus on plants as products, but as farmers and gardeners, we really need to be thinking more about plants as food. If your plants aren't getting eaten, they are not serving their ecological purpose, whether they're getting, for me, eaten by my customers, or for you as gardeners, whether they are not hosting all of the insect and mammal and soil life around them. So that little bee is working alongside the rest of the farmers here. And then this group in this shot is the EcoType team last year standing. There's some New York ironweed in front of them and some Joe Pye weed behind them. But the EcoType project has really been like a snowball rolling downhill. We just have gathered people, we've gathered species of native plants, and we've put them all in these founder plots. And this was just a couple of days ago in the founder plot row. And you can see each row has about 200 plants, so that's about a 50-foot row. And so what we've really done is preserve one species from Connecticut, of truly Connecticut natives, in one 50-foot row. And on this field, we have 8 species currently growing. This is the New York ironweed that is just coming up, just emerging now. And you can see that the amount of weed pressure already beginning would normally probably run a lot of gardeners nervous. But for me, I know that these plants, what I learned last season growing them is these plants are so strong that they will outcompete all of the weeds around them. I mean, most of them have weed in their name: butterfly weed, New York ironweed, Joe Pye weed. They're terribly strong plants. And to illustrate that, this is the Penstemon digitalis, the beard tongue, on May 25th. And this is what it looked like last May 25th on the farm. In its establishment year, these plants really do, they're perennial. So they take a little time to get started. But once they're going, they are just jamming forward. They are really unbelievably strong plants because they are intended, it makes sense, they are intended to be in this landscape. And just one quick note, I am stopping this video a bunch to talk, but when I established these founder plots last year, I really kept them kind of on the perimeter of the farm. It was a side project for me. But by July, you can see in this same shot, I put in a sidewalk or a walking path through the middle of this field because it was instantly the most compelling thing and the most compelling place to be on my farm was to walk down this path in the middle of August and see and hear the diversity of life. I mean, those plants were just always moving. And so I know as a farmer that those insects, much like those in your garden, yes, they're having a blast on the ironweed, but on their way to it, they're pollinating all of those blueberries and all of those squash plants and every tomato that I sell out of my store. And though July and August and September were beautiful, this was really the crop we were after. This image is that same ironweed that Sephra showed you. Here is a close-up of the seed crop. And that's what the EcoType project is trying to do, is to amplify the production of seed. And so these beauties with their little winged tops have to then be collected. And what I think is sort of a remarkable thing to note is that the seed is already has a built-in dispersal system. It's meant to blow on the wind and it's meant to scatter itself. And we as human beings are collecting that seed and just helping that process along by bringing it into production. Sephra is absolutely right. The seed cleaning is heroic work. We also learned, much like me putting in that walking path very quickly, I also realized very quickly that I wanted to bring the public. This wasn't just a conservation effort and a production effort. This really had a tremendous amount of potential to be an educational effort as well. So we hosted workshops and gatherings last year on seed cleaning. And then we really set Sephra out into the world to start educating and talking at our conferences and talking at gatherings all over the state to try to create, as she said, the market for these seeds as they turned into plants and then turned into production. And it worked because our first plant sale in Wilton set these plants, and here is a map of where those plants went. We had people coming from, if I can back that up for a second, we had people coming from Plymouth, Massachusetts, from New Jersey, and really, you know, though the seed has a small built-in wind dispersal system, the EcoType project allowed us to disperse these very special new plants all over Connecticut onto farms where they will create habitat for pollinators and support food systems, onto backyards that will also obviously support conservation efforts as well. And it was thrilling for us to see that plant sale really be so effective and so popular. We will have another one, as you know, at Aspetuck where these plants will be available. And the partnerships have been just astounding. It's been wonderful to see how many people have joined in. the one thing I also wanted to make sure you guys all were able to see and talk about is how we incorporate these plants, these ecological, these new EcoType plants and varieties into our home garden. So though I am, certainly not going to win any awards as a landscaper or gardener, for better or worse, this is my home garden. You can see I also don't do much weeding in there either. But last year, just for fun, I took a couple of the EcoType plants and put them around the foundation of my house. And lo and behold, by the middle of August, we had monarch caterpillars all over them. This is the milkweed. And when I say plants are food, plants are food. And I found myself raising an endangered species outside my kitchen window. And it was so exciting that I really began to change, or as Sephra said, put on my bug eyes. And I thought, these insects are working for me, and they are working for our food system. They are part of what is protecting my town and my harvest and my income. And I want them all over the farm. I don't want them anymore just sort of shunted off to the side as Dina's pet project with Connecticut NOFA. This year I have, and we're going to go back to my blueberry patch, which is right in the middle of what is actually, even since I took this video, that has been planted with about 2,000 tomato plants. And then there'll be another couple of fields here that are planted with tomatoes. We have flowers, obviously all of our vegetable production. But I took this shot because here, and you can see my pond in the distance, but I built this little row in because it is what I would call marginal land. This half shaded, half light row is not very useful to me as a farmer because of that little shaded end. So I don't have a ton of use for it in terms of my production and my field crops, but it is a great place. And it is going to be the newest founder plot at the Hickories for, I think right now I have planted a solidago, a showy goldenrod in that row for seed production again, but also as a way station for that queen bee as she goes to work on all of my crops. It really is striking to me that in looking at her, that she carries in her the colony, the eggs of all of the future bumblebees that will work all of the future crops on my farm. And it is moving to me to think that in that little bee carries my entire summer harvest and all of the food that will feed the community over the next 6 months of a growing season. So with that, I will turn it back to, I guess, Mel to finish and Jean to handle questions. But again, thank you so much for sort of allowing, or for your efforts in land trusts and in residential communities to support the agro conservation that is burgeoning.
That was great, Dina. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was, I especially love that phrase, put on your bug eyes. I'm going to remember that one. That's great. So I would like to ask Jean to consolidate some of the questions that have been coming in and ask our speakers what they think about these inquiries.
Absolutely. And Sephra, I invite you to turn your video back on so we're all together, and Mel, stay on screen with us and we'll all be here together. So we have questions. Barbara, thank you for your question. My front yard is actually more diverse with plants, lots of diversity, so I could retain those areas and mow otherwise. So the question around how do we treat our front lawns, our front areas, maybe rethink our lawns and these plots in front of our house? How do we add the diversity of our native EcoType plants in and amongst our gardens?
Dina, you want to just speak to,
Sure.
again?
Sure. With part of our work in the EcoType project, it's been so helpful to have some of the best nursery growers join us. Sal Gilberti, Daryl Newman from Planter's Choice. those guys will really be able, are the sort of end producers, and they will be able to answer those questions for you specifically. But I can say from my perspective, these plants can be integrated into existing gardens. They can also be planted as block plantings to stand on their own. The residential or the front yard is not necessarily a place for a big founder plot that's collecting seed and doing all of that. But it is a place, and I know Aspetuck has done this for their plant sale, of mapping what a mailbox garden would look like that might include 5 different native plant species, and putting those together in ways that are beautiful with mindful to height. I think Aspetuck is also, I know I've worked with Aspetuck in the last year to train landscapers as well. NOFA has an organic land care accreditation course that we offer. And some of the Aspetuck landscape partners would be also great at answering that question, because they really have a design or an eye for the design of how to incorporate these into a home garden. For me, I mean, I can say as a grower, they are not finicky plants. Like, I have been raising tomatoes and watering them with my tears for the last 15 years. And the specialty crops that we are trying to grow are tough to raise. These guys are not, in my experience. They are happy to be here. So I think they would incorporate very well into a home garden.
Can I just jump in there real quick and say, I think to Dina's point about putting on our bug eyes, it reminds me in the organic movement when people first had to be educated that those ugly tomatoes actually, had that amazing taste and that amazing flavor. And so now what we're addressing with the education around this is the idea that Mel spoke to, that we're trying to shift the paradigm on lawns, because lawns really, certainly in Connecticut, they're kind of this benchmark of proper land stewardship, when in fact it's really working quite against us. Mel has these great oak leaves that she showed us yesterday. Mel, I would love if you would show people again, because I think the point is that with our front yards, we need to be proud in showing our neighbors that it's not that we're lazy and not mowing. What we're doing, again, instead of just being homeowners, we're land stewards, is we're providing habitat for our local pollinators. So I think in any way that we can leave, and so Mel, so those oak leaves, and I'll let her speak about it. She says, oftentimes, like if we see oak leaves like that, we think, oh no, like our oak trees are sick, but actually that means that it's proliferating caterpillars, which supports our local songbirds. So that's what we want it to look like. So Mel, maybe I'll let you speak for a moment, but I think everyone who helps champion this initiative, we just need to help be kind of the front runners of making people understand what the new aesthetic needs to be to really do this work.
Thank you, Sephora. Yeah, this, it's been such a learning process for me and for other people to just be aware of what's going on around us, and that has been going on for millions of years, but waiting for us to take notice. And last summer I was sitting on my porch and I looked up, and the leaves were green, but they were filled with holes. My oak leaves looked like Swiss cheese, and it just was like an epiphany. It dawned on me that these leaves were food, as Dina says, they were food for the caterpillars. And this is why oaks are so important, because they bring over 534 species of butterflies and moths to the tree. They are the larval host and this is why they are key as a larval host. And so when your leaves come off the trees in the fall, we want them to look like this. And that's not what we used to think about 15, 20, 30 years ago. We would think, oh, we got to spray our tree. So it's just about being aware and making the connections in our heads and thinking about what nature's doing around us and helping it in any way we can. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Actually, Sephora suggested that these would make some really great lapel pins.
Yeah.
We'll work on that now.
You know, and that jumps right into another question that we have about how do we deal with destructive pests without harming the beneficials? For instance, we hear terms like OMRI listed, safe pesticides, neem oil, things like this.
I can speak to that because I have as many good bugs on my farm. I probably have an equal number of bad bugs that I've been dealing with. Not all bugs are my friends. But I will say that in my experience, and I've struggled with this a little bit with the pollinator pathway, because as these plants bring in the pollinators, they are also bringing in the warrior bugs, right? They are bringing in the beneficials. And so I can give an example in my fields right now. One of the things that we do is that we grow arugula here, and I have a huge problem with flea beetle, which is a nasty little black hopping bug that puts that buckshot hole in all of the arugula. Now, as an organic grower, I also think about what are the market thresholds, and I think gardeners should be thinking about that too. When do you really care that there's a bug on your tree, and when do you not? But at some point, that flea beetle becomes a real problem. And so you're absolutely right to look towards OMRI listed ways to solve that problem. But I can offer another sort of anecdote about that flea beetle, which is we, a couple of years ago, learned that the flower of that arugula plant, the brassica flower, is a signal or is a beacon for a wasp called a braconid wasp that is a predatory wasp, and it arrives and eats flea beetles like morning, noon, and night. And to me, there is something so magnificent about that gesture, that this arugula, if you allow, as we do in our farm now, if you allow 10%, 5% of your crop to go to flower and complete its life cycle, that mother plant, as she is about to die, or at the end of her life cycle, is signaling to bring in that one thing, that one special service that will protect all of her little seeds and babies as they grow. And so nature has these mechanisms already hardwired, built into it. When we as farmers run around and clip all the arugula and harvest it all and never let any of it go to flower, we break what is a natural cycle. And so, yes, to manage bad pests, we occasionally will use, if it crosses over anything into infestation, we will use an OMRI listed pesticide if we have to. I can't say that they're particularly effective, and they are certainly a last resort for us. But far more effective for me has been the lacewings, the soldier bugs, the braconid wasps, and that is just simply about diversity. The more diverse your lawn is, the less of those problems you'll have.
So Dina, tell us about the classification of the OMRI pesticide. It's very different than what we think of as a pesticide or herbicide, because we're talking about avoiding the use of pesticide and herbicide. So there are different classifications. Would you talk to that for just a moment?
Sure, sure. OMRI is the Organic Materials Review Institute. You know, I think it's a complicated conversation, and farmers and gardeners obviously split over it. But there are reviewed at the federal level, and you'll see that I should have included that listing or that label. You'll see the label on the back of an amendment or of a pesticide that says the ingredients in that pesticide have been approved, and they will not necessarily persist in the environment, meaning they won't, you know, run off your fields and into the water and then down into the sound and cause, you know, all these issues. Many of them, their ingredients are derived naturally as well. However, it is worth noting with any pesticide that is you going out into the world and bringing something on to your landscape that was not intended to be there. And so when you start trying to mess around with those natural cycles, we find as farmers time and time again, you reap the whirlwind. You know, you wipe out one bug and then you leave the plant open to another one or whatever. So I think it is much more effective in my feeling, though that arsenal is there should you need it. That's exactly what it is. It's messing around with nature. And so if you do choose to use that, I would definitely recommend using an OMRI listed pesticide. But again, I would often put your bug eyes on and figure out why. I would go back to the root and figure out not how to treat the symptom, but how to treat the cause.
Great. Thank you, Dina. And I think the idea that it's an organic mixture, it's very different than what we're thinking about, so that in future webinars, we'll talk about what that is and how to navigate that. That idea of one of our other questions about, how building this ecosystem where there is a balance between good bug, bad bug, and creating this biodiversity in our yard so that we're not thinking about use of pesticides, as you've just pointed out, with allowing that arugula to flower, which creates a balance, right? So the question is, how do we go about doing that? And how long would we want to consider that change? So if we are using a pesticide right now and we're really looking at a shift in thinking to biodiversity in our yards, how do we approach that? What are some of the first steps we might take to really not only shift our thinking? Well, you're here, so you're attending the webinar, so you're shifting your thinking, but thank you for the question. What are some of the steps we can take to create biodiversity and start with planting?
Mel, do you want to jump in, or Sephra? I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, Mel,
Okay.
you wanna start on that?
I'll unmute. Okay. So I think that, so I'll open up to Dina and Sephra, but something that we need to think about is that in our backyards, we have food webs, or we don't have food webs. And the traditional landscaping and integrating non-native plants, or traditional plants that we've been putting in for the last 20, 30, 40 years, are beautiful to our eyes, but they're not native. So I've recently, over the past couple of years, if I go to a nursery, I look for the plants that are attracting the butterflies, the moths, the bees. If that plant is not buzzing with activity, I will not buy it. So it's just a change of mindset to know that if you buy the plants that are buzzing with activity and bring them back and integrate them into your garden, you will begin to repair that food web, because then the more moths that you have and the more butterflies you have, the more caterpillars you have. And if you have more caterpillars, that means the chickadees will come and they will nest on your property, because a chickadee, an individual chickadee takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars in order to go from egg to adult. So that's a lot of caterpillars. So if you don't have the moths and butterflies to create the caterpillars to feed the chickadees, you won't have chickadees in your backyard. So you're trying to step by step heal the food web here. And then when we get back to managing the pests, we have to look to our beneficial insects like dragonflies, which down south, they apparently call them skeeter hawks, because they eat more mosquitoes than most other insects. And then our swallows that we have are also eating mosquitoes in our backyards. And then go to our mammals, up the food web, into our possums, which also can eat 5,000 ticks in a season out of our backyards. So the more steps that you put into the food web, or the chain, the food chain, the healthier and more biodiverse your backyard is. So you need to begin to insert these native plants, because that is the start. That's the core, that's where the energy begins, and then it rolls up the food web. So I love seeing possums in my backyard. And then I love seeing the fox that runs down my driveway every day at 9 a.m. Apparently she works in my backyard. And then at 5 p.m. she runs back out. And so to me, the more diversity I have, the more I have in my backyard, the healthier and biodiverse my backyard is for my family, for my pets, for nature. And it all begins with native plants. So So that's kind of, my philosophy these days. And it's fun too. Am I taking down my non-native Coosa dogwood trees? No, I have 6 of them. But I am integrating a lot more native plants and shrubs and trees. Those are the trifecta. Those are the 3 critical things that will feed a whole food web from spring to fall. They start with the flowers in the spring that have the nectar and the pollen, all the way to the berries and the seeds in the fall for migrating birds and migrating animals that are getting ready to also begin to go underground and hibernate. So that's kind of my philosophy, and I just encourage you guys to just take another look at the native plants.
So we have 2 more. We have 2 more questions before we go. Sephora, I know you want to jump in on this.
Oh, I was just going to share my screen because there was a slide that actually shows the plants that are available at the ecotypes that are available at the Aspetuck Land Trust plant sale. And I just wanted to quickly,
Right. So as Sephora is actually getting ready to share her screen, the idea of this, a step to take, is to actually visit the Aspetuck land site where there is an online order. We'll see that in a minute, and be able to consider putting in some of these EcoType plants. So here you go, Sephora, you're right back here.
Yeah, just quickly, I think, just a nod to where to start and what we're talking about. A lot of these pollinator plants that we're starting out with are also generalist pollinators. So there's a lot of pollinator friends that visit it, but it also are host plants for very specific pollinators as well. The Joe Pyeweed, for example, is a great host plant to the swallowtail butterfly. So oftentimes we know that the monarch has kind of become the icon celebrity of the pollinator movement. But as we realize that the more diversity we introduce, the more diversity of pollinators we will see. And so, again, actually that pink arrow is in the wrong place. It should be down below on the New York ironweed, which is a great host plant to the over 3,000 native bees that we have. So I just wanted to round out that conversation by saying this is so much fun, and you'll get to have such entomological diversity that you'll get to witness. And to Dina's point, it's really important to let things go back to seed, because oftentimes when we harvest things, when they're just in their fruiting bodies, it's like a kid at prom. It hasn't really done its whole life cycle yet. And we have to honor the fact that there's bugs and pollinators and things in the landscape that look to each of its seasons. They're looking to that plant as a resource. So those are a great example from Dina, and I will stop sharing.
I'll add one more thing as well, if it's, I can jump on to what Sephora is saying. I don't think I'm muted. Which is, as the EcoType project, which is really what we're sort of trying to bring to light today for you guys. One of the things that's exciting about being a part of the EcoType project is that we are really like making the road by walking right now. We have a couple of species that were wild collected by botanists last year that are now in production, and you can add that level of diversity. And the botanists are out there right now trying to identify new species that we can put into the pipeline of production. So right now, in that list that Sephora gave you, there is an additional probably 14 species that will be available by the fall. And those are going to be embedded into farms for seed production. And when that seed crop comes available, we'll have new species available. So being able to get involved with the EcoType project and follow as these species are found, amplified, cleaned, and put into production means that there'll be new species all the time. Right now, most of our production has been summer and fall blooming species. And you will see in the next year, our first spring blooming species start to emerge. And as Mel has said, I think the next step for us will be shrubs and trees. But right now, just trying to get a full complement of those wildflowers is where we're at. And it's fun to be at something. I got a call a couple of weeks ago from a nurseryman who said, I think I found the right population of partridge pea. Can we do it? Can we do it? And it feels like it's really such an exciting effort. As I said, we're really starting to pick up momentum. So I'm glad to see these plant sales are so successful. It means that the market is really there for us.
Best that you wish for plant sales that we sell out so we can have another one. And this interest from the public of really coming in, having these EcoType plants available to homeowners and gardeners, and having a plant sale sell out. I mean, that's just what you wish for, because that means there's a demand, and this then continues to grow in intensity through education and through events like this, and through Aspetuck, who is just a remarkable, not only land steward and all about land preservation, but a partner to all of us to be able to understand what's going on. So I'm grateful to be in the room with everybody here, because we're talking about really a process of bringing this seed, wild collection, appropriate plants for our ecoregion, this incredible effort to be on the farm to plant, and then the effort to bring it to you who are on the call today. So 2 more relevant questions here. The idea of how do we take into account the needs of the migratory visitors passing through our ecoregion? That is, the pollinators that aren't truly local, but depend on us as a stop.
I can answer that one. So other work that I do is the seed hunters. I've been reviving an allium heirloom called the Southport Globe Onion in Southport, Connecticut, and the wonderful people at the Smith Richardson Audubon there have been lovely enough to let me plant my onions in their restoration site, which is kind of in that Southport Greens Farms area. What they've been doing is taking out all the invasives that are back there and planting it with natives and bird food supplying plants. Now, when we think about it, I think the conversation, as I understand it, about monarchs is, and not to talk about the birds, but just to start with this understanding from the monarch perspective, when we have non-native milkweeds, for example, here, their bloom times differ than what the native bloom times would be for milkweed, which allows for perhaps too many monarchs to be feeding off that plant for too long. And they don't begin their migration. They don't start on their trail until too late, which actually, even though it looks like we have more monarchs, will end up killing them in the end, because they're gonna be too cold and not be far enough away, and that type of thing. So what we need to think about is these migratory birds, along their path, they rely on our ecotypes, because our ecotypes have that specific adapted bloom times that it's like when you drive through the desert and you see that successional flower bloom that kind of goes like a wave, like when you're at a football game and everyone does it. Those type of successional bloom times is really what our migratory birds are counting on. So when they go through those corridors and those pathways, we need to make sure we have that right genetics, because that is what's mimicking the natural ecosystem and is what is going to make the food that they need available when they're where they are. So the Smith Richardson, if you're all in that area, is a beautiful example of that. And there is just a most amazing avian diversity there, because there's food and there's habitat, and it's a great job. So I hope that answers your question.
There's also another question here about, you mentioned invasives. What, if anything, can we do about the many invasive plants in the region? And I think the question was about pulling them and eradicating them and making space for the natives. So
I've been doing a fair amount of that. The pond that I was talking about was a study in invasives before I started, and can certainly speak to how exhausting that work is, and commiserate with anybody who has as much barberry as I do. But I do think that it is possible to get ahead of it. That pond was 90% surrounded with Phragmites when I started. And I don't have a very big budget for maintenance, as you can imagine. So I, have been sort of slowly chipping away at it, and replacing it with some of the more aggressive natives. So I find that cattail and American bulrush is able to hold its own against that Phragmites just coming right back in after I pull it out. Similarly, I think in a lot of the meadows on the farm, we know that milkweed and things like that are able to hold their own against. I have milkweed pop up in the farm amidst, you know, a sea of mugwort, and that milkweed is still making its way. These guys are pretty strong, but that said, all of us are pulling invasives, and it's hard work. Welcome to Connecticut, right?
Well, and I also want to acknowledge, you know, some of these questions. We have a few more, and we are beyond our webinar time, yet there's such an excitement and more questions coming. So we'll go for about another 5 minutes with everyone, so everyone knows that we'll be here together for another 5 minutes. We had a question about suggestion for books to read, talking about the corridor ecoregion of our ecoregion of 59. Is there a resource that would be recommended to folks who are on the webinar today?
I think, is there a specific book that addresses ecoregion 59? Not to my knowledge, but hopefully that's something that we can all create. I think that if you want to just familiarize yourself with this concept of ecoregions, there's a lot of peer-reviewed articles. If you go to Google Scholar, for example, and you look up James Obernick, O-B-E-R-N-I-K, I believe, he's the first author on a lot of these peer-reviewed journals that talk about what an ecoregion is, why it's important, and how it's delineated. I think that really helps enter into the conversation. I think that Doug Tallamy, obviously, is a great resource, and any of his books really help point to the why of why, you know, local genetics and local natives are so important for supporting these green corridors that we're talking about. Those are really the first two that come to mind. I think also, if you want to understand more about seed sheds and this bioregionalism of seed saving that we're talking about, because the more that we save our local seed and replant it, the more resilient the seed we have is to do well where we are. So there is an organization called Seed Shed, and they have a lot of really great, wonderful information about seed saving, this concept. And then if you want a great magazine, I think it's quarterly, Dina can correct me, the Wild Seed Project in Maine is a beautifully illustrated magazine. And she not only explains the EcoType concepts really well, but has great instructional how-to and best practices in the magazine she puts out. If any of you all have other resources, those are what come to mind first.
I can definitely second the Wild Seed Project Journal. I think that's a fantastic one. I look forward to that one. On my bedside table right now is a book called In Search of Meadowlarks, which is about and it's fantastic. It's just recently out of, I think, Yale University Press. And it is on the species that interact with agrarian landscapes and how to protect them. And it's really a beautiful, it's like a, you know, hair-raisingly good book. But of course, Doug Ptolemy, but the Wild Seed Project is certainly the most accessible, I would say, of all of those. And they also sell plants. There it is. Nice. Yep.
And you know, you're getting such excitement from all of the presenters here. We are a little bit beyond our webinar time. We're hearing from people in the Bridgeport area that they very much like to embrace this movement. And how can they get involved?
Well, my email is sefra@ctnofa, which is SEFRA at ctnofa.org. And certainly we're really excited to keep on finding people who are interested in planting founder plots or have these habitat sites. So please get in touch with us and we can work with you in just figuring out how big of a space you have available and what that looks like for monitoring and implementation. But that's great. And we want this to be in as many places as possible. And certainly the more seeds that we have and the more species we have in upcoming seasons, we just want to get those in our soils and make Ecoregion 59 a model for the country, because really, I think our point of what we're trying to do here is create models and educations and handbooks that can really show the rest of the country and the rest of the world, this is what you can do in your ecoregion and how you can preserve your ecotypes. Because as we know, ecology is specific to all these different places, and we just want to help be a vessel for other people to be able to mimic this work and be doing this great conservation restoration work everywhere.
Bridgeport is particularly interesting to me because it's a coastal community, and a lot of the plants that are really unique to coastal habitats are sort of next up for us in the EcoType project in terms of finding, the strongest species for coastal restoration as well. And yes, definitely to, what Sephora was saying, I think the modeling that is happening here, the other really wonderful thing, and maybe this is a good way to think about wrapping up, is that for me, part of what's extraordinary about the EcoType project is that it brings farmers like me and botanists like Sephora to the Aspetuck Land Trust. And so to see land trust conservation groups working arm in arm with farmers in common mission is really what I think will allow us to kind of take on the next steps. I don't know where the support will come from, and we're hoping obviously for lots of it in the upcoming years, but if Bridgeport wants to get involved, then that could be a really huge piece for us, and we would love it.
And as well, the Aspetuck Land Trust, as well as the Pollinator pathway, that was another question. Do we create a pathway in Bridgeport, or do we declare all of Bridgeport a pollinator pathway? You can find out some more of that information on the different websites that will be listed as resources. So to wrap up, Mel, can we move over to you to talk about those steps that people can take, call to action after this call? And a great big thank you to you and Aspetuck Land Trust for hosting this Native Pairings webinar series.
Great, thank you, Jean. And I wanted to thank Jean again, our facilitator, for doing such an amazingly smooth job of facilitating these events. And a shout out to Jean and her company, Individual Differences, which she's a developmental and job consulting and coach. She would be a great coach. I would love to talk to her every day. So thank you very much. And
thanks so much for that.
So Dina and Sephora, thank you for your pearls of wisdom. This has just been an incredible program. We look forward to hopefully begin to have our native pairing lectures live again at Earth Place. Don't know when that will happen, but this has really been fun doing Zooms and learning about how to do Zoom. This lecture has been recorded, and we will have it on our Aspetuck Land Trust website. And I'll give the link to Dina also, so she can put it on the NOFA website as well. I just want to do another plug for the Wild Seed Project. And Heather McCargo, who's the president of Wild Seed, it's just an incredible magazine. It's just great. Is based in Portland, Maine, which is in our Ecoregion 59. So seeds that are purchased from her, any information from her, she is in our ecoregion, even though it's southern Maine. So this is a great resource, of course, in addition to Doug Tallamy. So I'd like to encourage people to go to our Aspetuck website. Number one, look at the selections for our native plant sale. Just a little correction that if you order 4 or 5 different things, you're going to get 4 or 5 different pickup times, which is not what we want. So you just have, it's a little glitch we can't seem to work out. You only have to come once to pick up everything. It's going to be social distancing pickup. So we won't have any contact with you. We'll work out the details on that. But I encourage you to go to our website, look at our native plant list. Pollinator Pathway website has a great native plant list as well. Integrate these plants into your properties, rethink your lawn, completely avoid those pesticides, And I look forward to everyone staying safe and healthy during this time. And to coin a phrase from Dina, put on your bug eyes and get out there and plant some native plants. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.